Congress has been unable to pass immigration reform that everyone agrees and understands is desperately needed.
I thought his messaging was really clear, and actually I think it addresses exactly what the American people are concerned with.
The Republican Party looks really lost right now.
He's politically weak. He can claim to be a fighter, but he doesn't get wins.
Hello, I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. The pandemic-era border policy known as Title 42 is coming to an end tonight. It was put in place in March of 2020 by the Trump administration and allows officials to turn away migrants on public health grounds. CBS News immigration reporter Camilo Montoya Galvez is in El Paso, Texas, with more.
Today will mark a major change in U.S. policy here along the U.S.-Mexico border. In just a few hours, the Biden administration is set to end the Title 42 pandemic-era restrictions on migration that have allowed officials to rapidly expel hundreds of thousands of migrants to Mexico. In the coming days, U.S. officials expect to see a sharp increase in migration. In fact, border arrivals have already soared to upwards of 10,000 migrant arrivals per day. And Border Patrol Chief Raul Ortiz tells us that another 60,000 migrants are waiting on the Mexican side of the border, hoping to enter the U.S. Caitlin?
Camilo at the border, thank you. For more on this, Margaret Brennan and Scott McFarland join us now. Margaret is CBS News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent and, of course, moderator of Face the Nation. And Scott is a CBS News Congressional Correspondent. I do want to get to immigration as soon as we can. But, Scott, we have some news, I understand, on this debt ceiling meeting that has now been postponed. We're expecting all of the leaders to meet tomorrow. What's the latest?
I've been speaking with congressional sources who confirm what we're also hearing out of the White House, that what was supposed to be a meeting of the principals tomorrow, the president and congressional leaders, has been pushed back to next week. That's often a sign of progress on negotiations and on legislation, because that means the staff is talking. That means there's some productivity or some need for the staff to continue talking before you bring the bosses back together. This will be rescheduled for next week. What was supposed to be a week-ending debt ceiling summit will now be next week's debt ceiling summit. But, Caitlin, the timing on this is all critical. June 1st is the deadline, the X date, and it's quickly approaching.
Yeah, with a limited time that Congress is actually in session between now and then. We'll come back to you, Scott. Margaret, I want to talk about immigration and Title 42. You interviewed Secretary Mayorkas over the weekend. Earlier today, he was talking at the White House and telling reporters that they've been making this message clear that migrants should not come. He said, quote, "Our borders are not open." But clearly that message isn't being received because we're seeing this surge. What is contributing to that surge?
Gosh, it's a huge question. This is a global crisis. There are 100 million people who are displaced worldwide, according to the UN. 100 million. We haven't seen a migration crisis like this since World War II. So you have to think about that, the strain on resources worldwide that's happening, the amount of people seeking asylum in places like the United States, and then you look at what's happening on the border. And it really just draws into stark relief that the crisis level influx we are at a time when the politics is broken, the system is not built to take this in, and the problems aren't going away. So the pressure is only continuing to build. In terms of why people are fleeing, that 100 million number, a lot of that is fueled by the war in Ukraine, yes. But then you look at what's happening at our border right now, not people landing at airports and asking to stay here as refugees, but people who are physically making that trek. It's no longer just Mexico and Central America, places that are of proximity to the United States. They are as far-flung as Venezuela, 5,000 miles away. You have people also making that trek by flying from China or flying from Europe to places like Nicaragua. Cubans coming into the United States by going to Nicaragua, getting a visa, and then coming up through. So they are looking for ways to come to the United States, and not all of what we are seeing is not going through a legal process. That is to say, claiming asylum is a legal process. Right. People have to show up at a port of entry and say, there's credible fear for my life and my safety. And that's where they ask to be put into a system that is not built to move swiftly right now. And that's what Mayorkas, the Homeland Security Secretary, is talking about.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these systems are so strained. And then meanwhile, you have cities essentially, issuing states of emergency almost because they are expecting these the surge. Mayorkas also, kind of addressed that today. He said, "I can't overstate the strain on our personnel and our facilities." Part of what they're trying to do, too, is set up these processing centers for those migrants who are trying to claim asylum now that the policy has changed. Do you have a sense of timeline, like what that would actually look like? Is that possible?
Well, there are many levels of problems and criticism to be layered here. When it comes to trying to unclog the border, that's what these processing centers are being set up for, to put people through legal pathways before they get to the United States. Those processing centers aren't open for business there this week. They may not be open for business for many weeks, according to what Secretary Mayorkas told me on Sunday. Today at the White House podium, he even sort of gave themselves a little bit more wiggle room there to say it's going to take time. And I know from talking to international organizations and talking to the UN, we'll be in there helping to set these up. This is asking a foreign government, whether it's Ecuador, which has been reluctant to say yes quickly, Colombia, which has been much more friendly to the U.S. and is likely to be the first place we see one of these processing centers open. It's opening a facility on foreign soil staffed not just by the United States, but also these international organizations like those who process refugees in the Middle East who are from the UN. That's what we're talking about, a refugee crisis. And so they are doing those interviews theoretically in these places that aren't set up for business yet. There are other pathways through applications online, through other methods you can apply for asylum. But when you hear Secretary Mayorkas say the system's broken, he's pointing the finger back at Congress saying, if you don't like the way the asylum law is written, if it's too open and loosey-goosey and anyone can come and claim it, change the law. And you haven't in decades. So they just continue to point fingers back and forth at each other. But that's where we are at a time when the scale of the problem has never been bigger.
And I mean, to that point, Scott, this broken immigration system, you hear lawmakers talk about that over and over again. I know House Republicans passed a measure today. Tell us a little bit more about that and kind of the general appetite or lack thereof, really, on Capitol Hill for any kind of broader immigration reforms.
It was no coincidence the day Title 42 expires, the U.S. House Republican majority had a vote on their border security bill, which would increase border agents nationwide, would increase the technology used at the border, and continue the construction of the border wall. Party line vote. It's dead on arrival in the U.S. Senate, but Republicans told me they hope this furthers the conversation and forces the administration to perhaps sit down with Republicans in Congress and try to negotiate something very symmetrical to the debt ceiling bill that was passed recently. They're hoping to prod a negotiation. All that being said, Democrats have kicked back, saying what Republicans did today in Congress was weaponize this issue and villainize migrants trying to enter the United States. Take a listen to some of the interviews we did late this afternoon.
It's inhumane. Asylum seekers are people. They are human beings escaping some disastrous circumstances that we have been a part of creating over many, many years of how we have harmed Central and South America. That's why they're migrating here.
Already have is a massive southern border crisis, and you have the end of Title 42 turns that crisis into a full-scale invasion. We've effectively given over the southern border of the United States to Mexican drug cartels.
We spent this day tracking the moderate Republicans, those in Biden-won districts, to see where they were on this, and they were messaging a lot on fentanyl, that this bill will help reduce the amount of fentanyl that comes into their communities. That is a politically advantageous argument to make, they believe. We pressed one of them, an upstate New York Republican, about that allegation from his New York colleague that this bill villainizes migrants. Take a listen to this. This seems like a messaging bill, and the Senate doesn't have any interest in taking this up. So what does this bill ultimately accomplish?
I cannot imagine a Republican or Democrat senator or member of the House of Representatives who doesn't see this today as a real crisis, a safety and security crisis, a humanitarian crisis, a drug crisis. The fact that there are some who don't want to acknowledge it is problematic in its own right. And so what we're simply saying is that we can secure our border safely, we can be compassionate in how we deal with those who want to enter our country, and we can save lives by confronting fentanyl.
Caitlin, no prospect of bipartisan agreement on any of this.
Yeah, of course. This has been the issue that has been among the most elusive on Capitol Hill in terms of getting any success and bipartisan accomplishments here. We will continue to cover it. Margaret Brennan and Scott McFarland, thank you both for your time and reporting. And you can see Margaret on Face the Nation right here on CBS News. This Sunday, she'll speak with South Carolina Republican presidential candidate and former UN ambassador Nikki Haley. And across the Republican Party, those in the 2024 presidential mix are expressing some criticism following former President Trump's CNN town hall. Our Robert Costa spoke with New Hampshire's majority leader in the State House, Jason Osborne, about why he supports Ron DeSantis in 2024 and how that town hall could impact the former president's bid for the White House. Here's part of their conversation.
What does it mean for former President Trump's campaign?
It's tough to say. I think it will probably, like most things that President Trump does, it will polarize the electorate. The people who are in his camp will be more in his camp. The people who are not will be less so. And I do believe he will continue to bleed off support as people get a little more and more exhausted by the show.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is someone you support. You've offered your endorsement even though he's not in the race. What happens if DeSantis jumps in? Is there really a path for him to get this nomination?
I think there is. I think you'll see him jump into this race in the next week, possibly longer, but I put my money on next week. And you'll see that he has a great amount of support, particularly in my caucus. And you'll see him springboard very quickly into the lead in this race.
And with Title 42 set to expire, declared and potential presidential candidates are already using it to go after the president. We'll look at the political impact next. You're streaming America Decides.
The Mexican drug cartels have more to say about what goes on the southern border than our own U.S. government does.
When Title 42 ends, we will have 14,000 illegal immigrants a day.
Welcome back to America Decides. The situation at the U.S.-Mexico border has long been a political talking point here in Washington, one that Republican candidates in particular often campaign on. The issue, as you saw just there, is already top of mind for those running or might run for president in 2024. Joining me now are Leslie Sanchez and Christian Ramos. Leslie is a CBS News political analyst and Republican strategist, and Christian is a Democratic strategist and senior advisor at Way to Win. Lovely to have you both here. Appreciate your time. Let's talk about immigration and the politics. Leslie, you have covered, Republicans well on this issue. No surprise that they are seizing on this to go after Biden. Are there any nuances here, though? And is it a successful strategy?
I don't know if you could ever say Republicans have a successful strategy, actually, on immigration reform. Even if you look at the Republican successes on passing reforms and laws, such as the 86 with Ronald Reagan, you can't forget that Ronald Reagan had tremendous pushback for his declared amnesty of 3 million, undocumented immigrants. So there was no win or lose in these situations. And it's remarkable. Even George W. Bush had the same problem when he talked about full comprehensive immigration reform. Many on the kind of stark right of our party were going to push back with what you heard were draconian measures. Fast forward to where we are today, I think there is an opportunity for Republicans. You're seeing, unfortunately, a lot of the governors step in, the courts are stepping in, but the federal government is not stepping in terms of leadership. And I think that's where they're going to seize an opportunity.
And to that point, are Democrats liable here? Is there some vulnerability for President Biden on this issue, especially as you see this surge right now?
So sources close to President Biden and his administration tell me that what they're putting forward is pragmatic, and it is looking to create a legal process for people that are coming here looking for help, and it is designed to create order at the border. Order is very important. When I talk to people on the ground in those border states, they tell me, look, we just want a legal, orderly process to allow people here. And it's an important distinction that we need to make here, because Leslie's making some really excellent points. At the end of the day, Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, they all agree that we should help people who want to come to this country, who are fleeing violence, who are fleeing oppression, and want to contribute, and we should help find a way. The difference is MAGA Republicans today no longer believe that we should let people in through our southern border who need help. They're very clear. Build the wall, right? Put people in cages on the border, children, right? That is their policy. We know what a Donald Trump immigration plan looks like. That's the problem we have today. We need solutions from Congress, and they're not helping.
I mean, at the same time, however, though, you have had Republicans make strides among Latino voters, obviously not a monolithic group, but Republicans might argue that this has been something that they haven't really faced political consequences for.
You know, the interesting part, we were just talking about right before we started, that we're both from South Texas. We both grew up along the border. Our families are from those areas. And for families that have been here generationally, they used to say, you know, I would feed the immigrants, the undocumented migrants, as they were crossing and provide there. And there was a lot of compassion and humanization of people as they were trying to work. George W. Bush's governor used to say someone who would walk 400 miles to feed their family, we need to find a legal way for them to be in this country. Where we are now is the fundamental federal system failed. So when you have 2/3 of undocumented immigrants have been here over 10 years with no path to legalization, the whole infrastructure is broken down. I think the most intentional individuals and organizations right now are the cartels and the coyotes and people that are moving these, these migrants in very desperate situations across the border in terms of a hope for a strategy that does not exist. It doesn't exist north of the border. So, I think that's more a political reality on both sides. And you can say, build the wall, do those things, but you still can't get them through the process. And people can't disappear into the U.S. economy and be vulnerable, and it just exploits a lot of individuals.
Leslie's bringing up an excellent point. And the Washington Post today had an editorial board op-ed. Biden's doing the best that he can on the border. And one of the key arguments they made, and what I hear from a lot of folks on the Hill, is we want to fix this, but we can't do this on our own. Congress needs the Republican Party to step in here with ideas, with plans that are actionable, that will actually help bring those folks who are here for 10 years, as Leslie mentioned, give them a path to citizenship, help them make our economy stronger and better. But we need the Republican Party to come and help.
And as you both know, I mean, immigration reform on Capitol Hill has long been a challenge, and it figures to be even more so as we're heading into a 2024 presidential election where this is just going to be such a hot button issue. Obviously, kind of switching gears a little bit, but staying on that topic, Donald Trump was again in the news last night, had a town hall on CNN. But I'm curious, kind of from both of you, how you see Trump playing here. I do want to play a little bit of sound from Chris Sununu, who's the New Hampshire governor. And Leslie, I want to get your take.
He's politically weak. He can claim to be a fighter, but he doesn't get wins. He can claim that he wants to secure the border, but he didn't do it. He can claim he wants health care reform. He didn't do it. He can claim he wanted to drain the swamp. He didn't do it. He lost all of those fights.
All right, so the governor talking to our Christina Carujo there in New Hampshire. Is this sentiment representative of the Republican Party? I mean, at the same time, we see Donald Trump leading in all of the polls and maintaining a firm grip on the base.
Donald Trump still has the firm grip on the base. Donald Trump is still the majority, earns the majority of support among primary voters. And you can't discount that the governor is also running for president, building his own national campaign. So he's coming out with some really sharp elbows and very fair punches. That town hall did not do Donald Trump any favors. If anything, it was cringeworthy to so many Republicans, including, I would argue, there is a stronger base of former Trump supporters that you are starting to see that want to pass on the baton. They do not want the antics, the drama. They like the style, like they want a strong, forceful type populist candidate, not a George H.W. Bush, white glove, a kind of soft, genteel type of leader. They want a tough spokesman, but increasingly these efforts are causing them to question what is the alternative.
And that's the biggest question heading into this primary is there going to be an alternative and who can make that case? We will talk to both of you a lot over the course of this cycle because there's a lot to discuss, but thank you so much for being here for our panel. 2 Texans on the panel today. Thank you both. And a history-making move by the South Carolina Democratic Party, what one woman's appointment to the Palmetto State means and what kind of effect it could have on the 2024 election. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Crystal Spain recently made history in South Carolina by becoming the first Black woman elected as chair of the state's Democratic Party. And she joins us now from Columbia, South Carolina. Crystal, good to see you. Thanks for being here on America Decides. South Carolina going to be front and center in this next presidential campaign in a lot of ways. And for Democrats, that's because Biden has moved South Carolina to be the first state in the primary process, replacing Iowa. What kind of impact do you think this will have on picking party nominees?
I think it's going to have a huge impact. South Carolina going first is very historic, and for the first time, the backbone of this Democratic electorate will get to have their voices heard first. Black voters have long been the backbone of the Democratic Party, and now we get to go first, and candidates will have to really center the values and the needs of Black voters.
I mean, speaking of that backbone, I mean, obviously Black voters were really critical for Biden, especially Black women, in not only winning the nomination, but eventually winning the presidency in 2020. Moving on to 2024, is that support guaranteed for Biden?
I think absolutely. Once we're able to really start talking about the accomplishments of the Biden-Harris administration, how they have delivered with all the legislation that they've been able to pass, that we feel the impact of here right in South Carolina, voters are going to get excited about that because they see their vote on display with the bipartisan infrastructure law and all the rebuilding of the roads right here in South Carolina. The historic investment in HBCUs. South Carolina has 8 HBCUs, so we feel the impact of all the success the administration had, all the success the administration has had thus far.
And anything you want to see them do differently? Anything that's lacking?
We can always do a lot more, but I think that they're really on a path towards being successful, and we're just looking forward to rallying our voters for Biden in 2024.
I'm curious too how Kamala Harris factors into all of this, because she seems to be playing a more prominent kind of outward role. She was featured pretty heavily in that re-election campaign video. How are voters in South Carolina, feeling about how she's doing? She's someone that they want to see more of, less of?
I think we want to see more of the vice president. She spent a lot of time here campaigning in 2020, along with a lot of the other 2020 presidential hopefuls. And so she has great relationships here in South Carolina. So we enjoyed seeing her in 2021. She spoke at one of our dinners last year, and it was exciting. Voters were excited to see her. So I definitely believe that she'll be a rallying force moving forward.
South Carolina has also been in the news because of an interesting dynamic. Obviously, abortion in light of Dobbs has been something that all states are grappling with. But South Carolina has a Republican governor, Republican legislature, and yet there have been Republicans in the legislature blocking abortion restriction bills. I'm curious what you make of that, what that says about the dynamics in South Carolina. And do you think that is something that will kind of remain, or do you think eventually they'll pass some kind of law?
Well, I know right now Republicans are fighting right now to get that abortion ban passed over at the South Carolina State House, and Democrats are fighting back every day to keep that from happening. And I know that it is a mobilizing issue here for voters in South Carolina because women, doctors, parents, everybody's fighting tooth and nail to stop that. So I'm hoping that won't be the case, but we're really fighting to stop those extreme abortion bans.
And some Republicans pushing back on it as well in the state. Well, Crystal Spain, I know that we will talk to you a lot over the course of these primaries as they heat up. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
And that does it for us today. You can stream America Decides Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.